Greetings, folks. Welcome to another episode of The Launch Space. My name is Brian Benz. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft. And today we're going to be talking about updates on migrating to Azure App Service. Updates on migrating to Azure App Service, actually. And we've got two great guests for you today. We've got Gaurav Seth and Christina Halfdane. And I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, hey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gaurav Seth, and I'm a program manager on Azure App Services team.
And Christina? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Christina Halfdane. I'm an engineering manager on the App Services team.
Awesome. So today we've got some great topics. Before we get started, I do want to invite everyone to join us. This is a live broadcast. Join us over at aka.ms/learntv, where you can ask questions and interact with our guests today. For those of you who are on the YouTube Microsoft Developer channel, thank you for joining us there. But if you hop over to LearnTV, aka.ms/LearnTV, you'll be able to ask us questions over there. I'll be monitoring things behind the scenes, but we'll let Gaurav get going with talking to us about, in general, migrating to Azure App Service.
Thank you, Brian. So, hello, everyone, once again. Today, we'll basically spend time talking about different options that you have available to you for migrating your web applications to Azure App Services. And before we get into specific tools, let's start by talking about why should you migrate to Azure in the first place. So I would basically say it's all about the innovation. We have more than 25 plus years of experience innovating SQL Server. Azure is the only platform which has built a managed platform for hosting .NET web applications. In terms of developer experience, it's all about we have the shared code base for SQL Server so that you have feature parity. And similarly, we have experience for performance of trillions of SQL queries every day and hosting millions of web applications, serving billions of requests per day. Now, in terms of providing you with migration tooling, again, we provide you multiple different free migration assistant tools. And again, last but not the least, we have some amazing benefits around Azure hybrid benefits and for the Visual Studio subscribers who save off the pay-as-you-go rates. So now let's talk about the whole Azure Migrate experience. As you all may be aware that Azure Migrate is the centerpiece for all things migration on Azure today. And Azure Migrate basically provides you tooling and experiences for discovering, assessing, and migrate your virtual machines, which could be on VMware or other environments, at scale discovery and assessment for your SQL servers. And it all, again, starts with building your software inventory, again, which you can use on Azure Migrate Appliance straight out of Azure Migrate. But the newest kid on the block is the whole ability to do a at-scale discovery and assessment for ASP.NET web applications hosted on your local IaaS servers. And just before we get started, a quick note on some of the supported versions and prereqs in terms of VMware requirement. Remember, currently we provide discovery and assessment for your VMs hosted on VMware environment only. And again, in terms of the host requirements, we support anything more than 5.5. And in terms of vCenter, it could be again 5.5 and above. Now, when it comes to the actual Windows Server requirement, we again support in terms of OS, Windows Server 2008 R2 and above. And for your web applications, that's your IaaS server. We again support anything. We support IaaS servers 7.5 and beyond running your ASP.NET web application. So currently the tool, the whole experience is built around ASP.NET web applications only. Now let's start talking about your at-scale discovery capabilities. It's all about discovering all the web applications that we basically get from the software inventory that we build using Azure Migrate experience. We perform the bulk discovery for your IaaS web servers using the Azure Migrate appliance. And then what we do is, to make things easy, we basically have this very intuitive dashboard which displays you a complete list of different IaaS web servers, its underlying infrastructure details, and the web applications on these individual web servers. And we even make it super easy for you to troubleshoot if there are any errors, because we go ahead and even suggest you what could be the possible causes and what are some of the suggested remediation steps. Once you're done with discovery, when we start looking at the assessment piece, we again allow you to set up bulk assessments for all the discovered ASP.NET web applications. And you as a user define the properties for your assessment. And these properties are like region, what's the kind of pricing, do you want to use any offer, or if you are interested in using the reserved pricing, and importantly, if you want to have an isolated deployment for your web applications post-migration. Now, what we do behind the scene is we go ahead and assess each and every individual web application against a set of readiness checks. Now, these readiness checks are all about, are you using multiple app pools, or what's the kind of authentication, or what ports are is being used on your IaaS web servers. Once the assessment is complete, we again provide you this very intuitive dashboard where we categorize your apps as ready for migration, ready with conditions, and not ready for migration. Now, ready with conditions basically means you can still go ahead and migrate your web apps, but there may be some amount of post-migration configuration required, example ports. We also go ahead and provide you a suggested migration SKU that is based on our years of experience hosting these web applications on Azure App Services. We do provide you a monthly cost estimate. And again, we even have the ability to drill down to view the assessment result for every individual web applications. Now, remember, we are also looking at building the whole bulk migration experience straight out of Azure Migrate tooling. And in times to come, we will also be announcing a public preview for the bulk migration experience out of Azure Migrate. But for the time being, the other migration tools and options that are available to you, it's all about the standalone migration experiences, both again for ASP.NET web applications, and we also have the standalone migration tooling for your Java web applications hosted on Tomcat. And this is, I would say, perhaps the easiest tool for you to get started. If you have a publicly available website, what you can do is you go ahead and give the URL on the page, and then we basically generate a report of all the different technologies that your web app is using. And we also let you know if that's compatible with Azure App Services. Now, once you have done this quick discovery about your website, what you can do now is go ahead and download this free migration assistant tool. And the tool basically provides you a super helpful guided experience around discovery, assessment, and migration of a standalone web app. And again, it could be on ASP.NET, it gets migrated to Azure App Services on Windows, or it could be a Java Tomcat web application, which basically gets migrated to Azure App Services on Linux. Now, the Java Tomcat tool currently is in public preview. So, in addition to the standalone migration assistant tools, we also have the whole PowerShell script-based migration experiences. Now, what the PowerShell script migration does, it basically allows you to do a full server application discovery, assessment, and migration. So basically, if you want to do a discovery, assessment, and migration for more than one web application hosted on your IaaS web server, you should be looking to use the PowerShell script-based experience. Again, it's super easy. There is no installation required. It is just the set of PowerShell scripts that you need to perform. And there's another important use case. We also allow you to run the discovery and assessment in a disconnected or an offline environment. And then basically, once you are ready to migrate, you can port over the discovery and the assessment data to a VM where you have access to internet, and then you can migrate that to Azure App Services. Again, the Powershell script experience is currently in public preview, but of course, we will be announcing GA in time to come. In addition to this, look at a very realistic scenario where you have custom OS dependencies, or you have a dependency on some kind of a custom COM component or a custom assembly for your web application. The simplest example I could think of is maybe a PDF writer where you have export to PDF functionality. Now, due to the whole sandbox environment that Azure App Services operates in, some of these application assemblies may not be directly compatible or available once you deploy your code as is to Azure App Services. So now you have the option using the ASP.NET App Containerization and Migration tool to migrate these kind of web applications to Azure App Services. So how the tool works, again, once you download and run the tool, we basically go ahead and do a remote discovery and assessment for your web applications. And once we have done that, we again allow you to create container images. And you even have the ability to customize the whole creation process. Once your container images are created, we go ahead and deploy these container images to Azure Container Registry, and from there you could again choose if you are on ASP.NET platform, you can again choose to deploy your container to Windows Container on Azure App Services, or it could be Windows Container on AKS. The tool also allows you to again discover and create a container image for your Java web application hosted on your local Tomcat servers. And again, you could decide to deploy your container image from the Azure Container Registry to again Azure App Services for Linux or AKS. Now with this, I will hand over to Christina. She will take us through the demos for all the different tooling options that we just spoke of. Over to you, Christina.
Thanks, Gaurav. So as Gaurav mentioned, I'm going to show some of these tools and features in action. So I'm going to share my screen here and start on azure.microsoft.com. This is one of the landing pages for some of these standalone tools. This is the option Gaurav mentioned for plugging in a URL, getting kind of a gut check about those technologies working on App Service. And these are some of these download standalone tooling options. The ones I'm going to show today, excuse me, I'm going to show the migration of a Java app running on Apache Tomcat. I'm going to show the Windows version, but it's very similar to the process used for Linux. I'm also going to show this PowerShell scripts preview as one of the options included in the demo. I'm going to start here with the Java app migration. I have this one running here on this server. It's a sample PF Showcase application. And I have that App Service Migration Assistant already running here on this machine. This is already running because I've run through it once and logged in, so you won't have to see me do that particular step. This is going to have pretty much the same experience for .NET applications as Tomcat applications. Today I'm going to do the PF Showcase app. And this is going to then do the assessment. This isn't going to detect literally everything that could possibly go wrong, but it is going to identify some of the things, some configuration patterns we know don't work well on App Service. For this application, the only particular warning that I have is that it's running on port 8080, which is very common for Tomcat applications as a default, but on App Service, incoming traffic is only allowed on port 80 or 443, so that's something that client requests would have to update once this is on App Service side. This is where I would usually log in, but lucky you, you don't have to wait for that step. This is an optional step where I can go ahead and specify an Azure Migrate project if I want to just save summary information about any particular site that I have assessed or migrated. So it's all in one place for me to look at later if I want to. In this case, I'm not going to do that, but I am going to specify this minimum required information, the subscription where I'm going to put it, the resource group, and what I'm going to call the site that I'm creating. And then I'm going to talk about app service plans after I click migrate, because this can take a minute. Now, the app service plans are basically, an app service plan is the set of machines where your website is running. I could always create a new one through this workflow, but if I have one already, I could choose to use one I already have and have more than one site running on the same app service plan. That's what I'm doing for this particular migration. So here, creating site resources, it doesn't have to create the app service plan. It just has to create the web application running on the same plan. In this case, because it's a Tomcat application, it's going to look at the local server and what version of Tomcat is running locally, as well as what version of Java is being used. And it's going to make sure that the site that's created in an app service is using the same version of Tomcat and the same version of Java, so that the application runs basically the same in both places. Once the site is created, it's going to go ahead and move on to the publish step. For this, it's going to look at your local server to check if your application is currently running from a WAR file. If that's the case, it's going to use the existing WAR file that's already there. If it's not the case, it's going to package up the site content as a WAR file and deploy it using one of the app service deployment APIs, which is the step that it's doing now. And this is the step that usually takes a minute to run. One other comment I don't think I added yet about the app service plans is that these app service plans can, like I said, you can use a new one, you can use an existing one. You can also put them on an isolated environment. So if you have the need for isolation, you can go ahead and put those on an app service environment. This will work pretty much exactly the same way for that kind of an app service plan as well. One other comment, once this completes, this will basically move on to the next screen as soon as the deployment API returns that the WAR file has been deployed to the new app service site. I'm going to show you a couple of the links that come up on the final page. One of them takes you to the management experience for the site resource that was just created, which is something you'll see again in this presentation today from me and Gaurav. But I'll also browse the site itself. I just want to throw out the caveat here that there's a very good chance we're going to get a 404 on that browse, just because, just like when you drop, let me open this link before I keep talking. Just like when you drop a WAR file on your local Tomcat server, it can take a minute to unpack. The same is true for once you complete the deployment of the WAR file to the app service site, it can take a moment to unpack. So this is the management experience in the portal for this site resource that was just created. This browse link would take me to the site, the exact same link as going to your website like this. But yes, if that unpacking hasn't completed, we are not going to wait for it. We can maybe circle back here at the end of some of the other demos. So that is the experience for a single application on using the standalone App Service Migration Assistant. But there is also, I'm going to go kind of to the other extreme of doing an entire data center at once. This is demonstrating the Azure Migrate integration. So if you go to portal.azure.com, if you were to type in Azure Migrate, before you got all the way to the end, you'd see this option for the Azure Migrate service. And when you click that, it'll bring you here to the Azure Migrate Hub. Now, the option we've had for a while here is web apps. This is where that summary information goes from the standalone tool, if you're saving that for later to look at all in one place. But now we have this integration in preview to look at a whole data center at once to do the assessment, discovery and assessment of .NET web applications. So if this is your first time doing that kind of a discovery, you can go ahead and click Discover here, and that would get the process started for how to set up that discovery. Now, I'm not going to walk through this whole discovery because it can take a little while, but this discovery using Appliance is the way we would recommend doing it. And the process here is effectively, we'll provide a lightweight VM. You create that somewhere within your network. And this is good for a couple of reasons. One is you provide the credentials for how to connect to your various servers in your data center, and you do that on the appliance. And it stays on the appliance within your network. It never leaves. Those credentials always are stuck with you, never going to the Azure backend. The appliance VM itself also has all the logic for doing all of the discovery and assessment, and only has to send back sort of the summary final data that's generated to the Azure backend. One of the nice things about that is it's also agentless. So you have the appliance there, it makes all those connections and does all this discovery without installing anything on the actual individual VMs in your system. Now, the steps to do that, again, it can take a few minutes, obviously. You're downloading basically a VHD and propping it up. There is a nice walkthrough of that in that UI that you were just on, but also there's very extensive documentation about how to do that really click by click. And once you stand up that VM, it's also a very guided experience. This is a screenshot of some of the UI that just pops up, make sure all the connections and everything are working great so that discovery works once you have everything all set up. Now I'm going to cut over to an existing project that has already done the discovery. And you can see what's new here is servers running IIS. In this case, it discovered 29 servers that were running IIS in this data center. And on this view, you can see various servers. For each one, it has a certain number of web apps that were discovered. If you click on that, it will open up showing you the discovery information here for each of the web apps that were discovered, some kind of top level information, things like the application pool that was used, ports and URLs. If you want to go to the next level, you can also do an assessment. So from here, the new option for App Service is to create an App Service assessment, which is this option. This lets you pick any subset of the discovered IIS servers to include in the assessment. Now, I already have 39 in this project, so rather than making a new one, I'm going to open an assessment that's already been done. You can see this assessed 543 web applications. Of them, it determined most of them were ready or ready with conditions, except for 16 of them. So for all of these 527, we have created a cost estimate for how many app service plans and what that would cost in app service. That's included here. Now, this is based on the number of app service plans, because that's the unit that you are billed for in app service, those set of machines. As noted before, you could run multiple apps on an app service plan. And so we've picked kind of a general best practice of only doing, for this particular SKU and size, for example, 8 web apps per plan. Depending on the SKU and size, it might be more, it might be less. It might be perfectly fine to run more apps than that, but it's something you should probably do with some discretion and thought. So this is kind of our base for that estimation. Now, if you want to look into why we determined that some of those applications were ready or ready with conditions or not ready, you can look at the assessment details and the readiness details. Now, I'm going to skip ahead here to one of those not ready ones. Now, you can see if something is ready with conditions, it's only going to have warnings. In this case, this is the same one we saw for the Java application, warning me that the port is not on 80 or 443. There was a binding for a different port. However, this application is marked as not ready. And if I look at it, it's because it has these 3 issues that were identified as things that aren't going to work well on app service, like that the application pool is using some of these particular authentication types or identity types that are not going to translate on the app service side. Or similarly, that the configuration for the application might be in the server instead of at the site level and isn't going to be moved during the migration without moving the configuration first. Now, as Gaurav mentioned, at some point in the future, there will be an option to do migration in this kind of experience as well. But in the interim, or supposing that you have a scenario that's somewhere between single site and whole data center, we have the PowerShell scripts as kind of an option to get you going in that range. So I'm actually going to go to this server, this A404 W2K12 R2 VM5, which is a very intuitively named machine. And on this machine, I've gone ahead and put the PowerShell scripts preview. Now that's this folder here. These are the scripts that you get in that download. And this is all that you have to put on the machine. And this demo script is not usually included. That's what I'm going to run and show you what's in it. It's basically an extra simplified version of the sample server migration script that's here, just to be a little more demoable. So we're going to run that demo script. It won't take that long, but while it's running, I'll show you what it's doing. This is the whole script. It's basically these first 9 lines. I'm calling the get site readiness script that comes in the directory there and telling it to save the results. This identifies all of the sites running on this IIS server and saves the results for what checks failed for those sites in this summary file. I also have the option of pointing for this particular script. I could point this at a remote server as well using PowerShell remoting. Now, once I have those readiness results, I can also do a packaging step to get ready for migration. This takes the readiness results as the input of all the sites to package and automatically packages everything that doesn't have any errors. Now, if, for example, you decided you really want to package and try putting them on App Service anyway, you can add this Migrate Sites with Issues flag. This would let you package up even sites with errors to do for migration later. The only exception is if for some reason we cannot access the content of the site or it is greater than 2 gigabytes in size, then we still wouldn't package it because the deployment API has a hard limit of content being only up to 2 gigabytes. So it still wouldn't work to do that as kind of a test and see how it goes. But otherwise, we'll let you try it anyway. Now, this created this output. You can see this is the readiness results file that I talked about. And this includes, for every single site that was on the server, the failed and warning checks, as well as some metadata about the site. So you can see default website here didn't have anything that was failing. But for example, site 1 had a warning. And this is that same, again, TCP port check warning that we saw on some of the sites in the Azure Migrate UI. And this is included, again, for every site on the server, all 51 of them, including default website. Here's 50. Now, in addition, here's the packs directory that I made that has all of the packages, including this package results file, which is basically an index of all of these packages to use for later. Now, if your server is particularly locked down, like this server happens to be, I'm going to show you how you can then do the sort of offline migration. So I'm going to take this set of packages from the packaging step, and I'm going to go and put this on another machine to do the migration. You can see I have this backup version in case for some reason this connection was not working out. All right, so I'm going to unpack this. Great, and you can see this is just the same content with that package results file. Now, I also have those same scripts here on this machine with a demo script added. So I'm going to kick off the demo script and then again, kind of show you what's in it. Now, this is the demo script here. Instead of running these get readiness and packaging steps locally on this server, I already ran them on the other server, and I just have to point it to the output from the packaging step that I moved to this machine. Then I can do this generate migration settings step using some values that I have specified here as defaults for the region, my subscription, and the resource group that I'm going to use. And this will generate a file that I can use as a base for the migration. It's technically optional. You could create this settings file however you wanted, but this creates a nice kind of base settings file for you to work off of. And in fact, that's what I've done here as well. It's going to generate the default file using these settings for all of the sites that were packaged. But I'm going to go ahead and take those settings, and I'm just going to take the first app service plan, the first few sites in that app service plan. So it's just a small number of sites migrating for the purposes of time. And I'm going to even change some settings. I'm going to change the tier from the default one that's selected there to standard. And I'm also going to update the Azure site names to try and make them very unique so that they are available on app service. Otherwise, the very first step when I do the migration, it will validate those site names and tell me they're not available. Oh, and I'm going to remove spaces because those aren't available characters in app service site names. But otherwise, I'll be basically using the settings that were generated for me and passing those into Invoke Site Migration. This will save in its results summary information about all the resources that were created in Azure, the resource groups, app service plans, and for every single site, a little bit more information, such as the same kind of site browse and management links that were created by, for example, the Standalone tooling. So also you'll notice this is going to do this start. So when it's complete, it's going to go ahead and open these up. And I'm using that from the output from the script, but we also are going to save it to a file. So even if you don't use it right away or you lost it, it'll be saved for later. Now let me see. While that is going on, let's look at the settings that were generated. Now this is the initial settings file that was created for all of those 51 sites. Now I could have done a filter at any point along the way. I could have filtered the readiness results and only packaged some based on that input. I could have taken the package file and removed things from there as a filter to go on to the settings. Or I'm going to do it here at the settings stage. I took the settings created and then did my filtering to reduce the sites that were there. But again, it's something you could choose to do at any level along the way. So this is the original one. You can see it's grouped by app service plans. So here it's created one plan with a default here of 16 sites, because for Premium V3, we think that's a reasonable number of sites to have. Here's another app service plan with another 16 sites. Now, I could change settings for any of these app service plans. I could use different subscriptions that I have access to for any of the plans, different resource groups, I can update this name, change the app service plan characteristics, or change which sites are going in which app service plans. Basically, this is a free-form file. I can change anything that I want. But as I mentioned, the things I changed this tier because they save Premium V3 for the real customers, and also things like the Azure site names. Oh, and I see it has popped up the results, but in another window here. So here is that created site, and again, the management link. And that means that these are also now available in the migration results. You can see for later or any time. I also have those available here for those 3 sites that were migrated. So now that we've shown you kind of both ends of the spectrum, migrating a single website using the App Service Migration Assistant, doing a very at scale discovery and assessment of .NET applications for a whole data center, and doing the kind of single server using the PowerShell scripts, but bulk for the whole server at once scenarios, I'm going to hand back to Gaurav to talk a little bit more about App Service.
Thank you, Christina. So as you have seen all the different tool options that you have to migrate for your web applications over to Azure App Services, now I'm going to show you some important configurations that you can basically perform once you are done with the whole migration of your web applications. Now, let's start by simply saying that I have a web application, basically ASP.NET web application, which connects to a SQL, Azure SQL database behind the scene. But I want the connectivity to remain, basically the traffic for my connectivity to remain within the virtual network that I define. So what I'm looking at is a secure connectivity option. Now you start doing that basically by going to the networking options. And as you can see here, what I've done is I have integrated my web app to a VNet. Now, if you see, I am using a VNet here, and I am assigned it to a subnet. Now, once I have basically integrated my web app to a VNet and a subnet, I will quickly show you how things look like on the Azure SQL side of the house. If I come here, basically you can see that I am using the same virtual network. Of course, it's a different subnet where I have my integration for Azure SQL. Now, what this effectively means is that when my web application is connecting to this Azure SQL database, the entire outbound traffic from my web application to the SQL server is via my virtual network. Now, that is all about the outbound traffic. Now, if you want to have some sort of restrictions or maybe I can say securing the inbound traffic for your Azure web apps, again, you can go ahead and even create a private endpoint for your web app. Once you create a private endpoint, what happens now is the incoming IP for your web app is assigned from an IP that your app is connected to, the subnet or the VNet that your web app is connected with. So that's, again, basically now what you are saying is I want this web application to be accessible only within my virtual network. You can even go ahead and define access restrictions. Access restrictions basically allow you to, it's more like an IP whitelisting scenario where if you want only your web app to be accessible from a certain range of IP addresses or certain IP addresses, you can again do that in access restrictions. So that's a quick overview of sort of networking settings that you can perform post migration. Now, the other important aspect that I want to talk about is the whole security thing. Now, as you can see that once I basically have the my web application migrated, we provide you quick recommendations about various security options that are available for your Azure App Service. As you can see here, I have 4 recommendations, which are again by the severity high or medium. And you see, I basically have a recommendation which tells me that I have FTP available for my web app, and it is recommended to use FTPS. Basically, if I want to do a code deployment using FTPS protocol, or you can see I have some recommendations around we should be using an SSL cert, or I should be basically using a managed identity. Now, if there were any security incidents or alerts, again, all of those show up on this page. So again, this is a very quick and intuitive way for you to start managing the security policies for your web app. Now, another important experience that we should all be looking to use against our web applications is around the diagnose and solve problem experience. Now, this is basically a screen where what we do behind the scene is we run these set of detectors and we kind of surface any data which could help you in troubleshooting common issues across your web applications. And we again make things super easy by categorizing them against various categories. Take a simple example. If I want to do a quick risk assessment for my web application, what we do here is we run a set of readiness checks for best practices for availability. So now what we are doing is basically we are checking all the metadata and the deployment topology for your web application. And once the report is ready, we will go ahead and show you some of the recommended stuff. So you can see here that yes, good, I have always on enabled, but I can maybe use more than one instance in my Azure App Service plan. And the recommendation is to scale out to 3 instances so that they are basically split across different upgrade domains, and all my instances don't get upgraded at the same time. Now, there is another insight which is all around auto heal not being enabled. And again, auto heal is a feature which helps you build resiliency and high availability for your web application. Now, the risk assessment feature is also telling me that we do provide an inbuilt health check feature, which basically what you do in a health check feature is you go ahead and provide a URL for your web application, and we ping the URL and let you know the heartbeats for your web application. So again, this is just about risk assessment. Maybe if you want to look at things related to Configuration management for your web applications could be around scaling operations or around what kind of the TLS version that's available for the web application. Again, you can see we provide you a host of insights on the whole diagnose and solve problem experience. Let's wait for this report to generate so that if there's something important, I can talk through it. But the idea here is post-migration. If we see that there are set of recommendation of best practices that again we have accumulated over years of experience of hosting these billions of millions of web applications with billions of requests each day, we basically surface them for you to consume and make necessary changes. Why till the time this happens, let me show you another important piece of functionality for your web applications that we have recently GA'd. So the idea is if you have deployed you have deployed a Java Tomcat web app using one of the tools that we showcased onto an Azure App Services for Linux, and you were using some kind of a file share for surfacing your content, we now allow you to go ahead and mount Azure Storage as a local file share for your web app. And as you can see, it's super simple to create one. I can go ahead and give it any name that I want. And again, the basic and advanced option, the idea here is if your storage account, again, is integrated with a virtual network, in that case, I should be using the advanced option. If my storage account is not integrated with a virtual network, I should be good to use a basic option. Maybe let me just go ahead and choose any random account. And again, for Linux, we do allow mounting Azure Blob as read-only. But for Azure Files, you have the options to do both read and write. So as you can see, I have some share available. I can go ahead, maybe just make it unique. And I can do that. Now, if I was to go ahead and maybe use a storage account, the one which has the VNet integration, this is where I see that I cannot load storage containers anymore, and I am now supposed to use the advanced option. Now, in the interest of time, I have already created some of these shares. So now what happens is, if I go ahead and access this web application and I just go ahead and upload a content over here, basically what happens is this content will now be available on the local file share. And the file share is basically Azure Storage in this case. And you can see from the storage side of the things, a quick call out on networking. What I'm doing is I basically have a private endpoint connectivity again. So the outbound traffic for my file share, for my Azure Storage file share from my web application over to the storage account is again happening over a private endpoint. So I have defined a private endpoint, and what I've said is simply that grant access only via the selected network. So that's a quick piece of configuration that you need to be aware of. And as you can see that in terms of configuration, luckily we don't have too many recommendations or any kind of a critical thing to suggest here. So as you can see, once you have migrated your web applications to Azure App Services, you can do these host of configurations using the management of plain experience itself, which makes things super easy for you. So in terms of the content and demo, this is what we had to cover today, but Christina and myself will be there for some more time. So please feel free to post your questions at ak.ms/learntv.
Great. Thank you. That was wonderful. And yes, as Gaurav mentioned, please do join us at aka.ms/learntv, where you can ask us questions, interact. We've got myself and a colleague who are monitoring things behind the scenes and can ask questions. I do have a question for you, for either of you to begin with. It's great, Christina, that you showed a Java application. Funny story I had a Java application, a demo app. It ran on port 8080, of course. That's the default when you're using Spring and Tomcat and a few other things. And one of the things that happened was I had my demo out. It worked. Everything was fine. It ran on the local machine. It ran on a server. And I was doing a conference speaking at a conference in Paris, and couldn't get it to work from my hotel. And I also couldn't get it to work from the conference center, and it was really bugging me why. And it turns out that for some reason in France, port 8080 is locked down on most internet service providers by default. Like, they have a very limited number of IP addresses that allow public Wi-Fi and IP addresses to access things from. So it was just completely failing all the time. And my workaround was to put the application on a virtual machine and then connect to it, and then be able to, so I had to basically remote into the virtual machine and then connect to my demo application and run it that way. But I figured it out. It was not the way I wanted to spend my evening in Paris, but hey, it's I'm working. So yeah. Anyway, all that preamble is to ask you a question. Do we have any special requirements, networking or machine-specific requirements for the standalone migration tool that you show?
So luckily we don't have any special requirements for either of our standalone tools that Christina demoed. So basically what you need is standard connectivity over port 80 and 443 for us to go ahead and connect back to Azure App Services and do all the migration for you. And in addition, both the Java and the ASP.NET migration tools, basically they are all self-contained. So all the assemblies that are required are pretty much available within the location of installation itself. So the good part is you really don't have any special requirement. These are all just self-contained, self-hosted experiences.
Great. Does it run on Windows and Linux if you're running it locally? Because you can download it and run it, right? The app migration tool, is that correct?
It's a different download for both cases, but for the Electron application, it's basically the exact same look and feel on Windows and Linux for the Java Tomcat applications. Okay,
sweet. I'm thinking of my experience. I could put it on a Linux VM and run it from there if I had to. So, of course, the applications won't be there, but yeah, that's one way. What about, as well, migrating, any other additional advice on migrating in secure and locked down environments? If you have something like I just described in Paris.
So let me quickly take on that question. So there are two parts to the answer here. One is, luckily, Christina actually demoed the whole experience. If you are on a lockdown server farm, to say so, what you could do is you can use the whole PowerShell experience, where you can discover and assess your web applications on a server which is basically locked down. And then what you do is you copy paste the generated package files over to a VM which has connectivity to internet, and again run the whole migration script. So that way it's more like an offline online experience for you. So that's about how you run the whole migration tooling experience in an offline online world. Now the other part to my answer here is that, what if you have a requirement to do the migration to the secure and an isolated environment itself? That's where App Services environment comes into the picture, because again, as you all may be aware, App Services environment, and by the way, for those of you not aware, we recently announced GA of App Services environment version 3, which makes things even super simple for you. The idea for ACE is that you can basically go ahead and have an isolated deployment for your entire app services hosting experience. It's kind of within your virtual network, and you can define to have it like either externally facing, or you could just keep it locked down and have it like internally load balanced. It's only available within your virtual network. So yeah, there are a host of network level security practices that configuration that you can perform on it. So yeah, that's the option. You can run the tool in a secure isolated environment. You can even deploy your web applications to a secure and isolated environment.
Okay, great. I assume it's a similar answer for hybrid scenarios. If you want to migrate an application which needs some of the application on-prem still, and then migrate part of it to the cloud.
You know, Brian, when we talk about hybrid, I have to say that pretty much every service in Azure, or the whole ideology around Azure services, is built around this whole hybrid connectivity for our customers, because we do understand that there will be scenarios where some of the, especially the data estate, may continue to be on premises, maybe for regulatory or security or reasons, and the app side of the world might move over to Azure. So even with the Azure App Services, we do light up multiple scenarios. And example, the migration assistant tool itself allows you to create hybrid connectivity. So a simple example, your database could continue to be on premises, whereas you deploy your web app in Azure App Services, and using the hybrid connections, the two can talk. So yeah, that's the simplest form of providing you hybrid connectivity. For more advanced scenarios, you can of course set up VPN connectivity, and you can even basically have your VPN connectivity flowing over your private IPs. So using the whole Azure Express route experience, and that's where again ACE plays a very important role, working with your. So you can again do this whole hybrid scenario where it's more like your data center is more like an extended data center for Azure using the express route experience. So yeah, again, we light up multiple different options for you.
Cool. Another one, bulk migration. So Christina mentioned before the 2 GB limit on a single application. Does that apply for multiple applications as well? If you want to do a bulk or migration scenario, what would be the best practice in that area?
So, I mean, that is a per application limit. So you can do multiple applications that were all just under 2 GB. That would be totally fine. And it's specifically because of the deployment API that we use. It is possible to run an application and host one on App Service that is much larger than 2 GB. It's just, you would have to deploy it in a different way. It's maybe not going to be that automated lift and shift tooling that we have. You might have to do it using FTP or something, a separate mechanism.
Right.
It's also, Gaurav was showing another option, for example, for mounting the bring your own storage. So there's a lot of different ways you can do kind of large content with an app service site as well.
Yeah, great. Okay. And by the way, I like the way that you broke down some of the script, and then you had a PowerShell that was called to do the environment variables and all the setup of the application as well, because I've had to do that in DevOps as well, with Azure DevOps and GitHub Actions, because the developer knows what specific pieces of the application need to be configured, and they can communicate that through a PowerShell script and just give you this and say, okay, here's your minimum viable PowerShell that you need to make this application run. And then you can also have the script that can be provided by the ops team, which is, this is the minimum viable configuration you need for the actual environment that you're going to run this application in. So it's a nice split, a nice dichotomy. I do exactly the same thing with DevOps too. So that's cool. That's cool as well. All right, we have a few more minutes. If anyone wants to ask questions of our guests, we're here for another 6 minutes or so. Please ask away on aka.ms/learntv, and we'll read your questions and address them right here on the air. In the meantime, I do have a couple more questions. Gaurav, you covered a lot about best practices for mounting storage to web apps and IP connectivity, private IP connectivity for inbound apps. Do you have any more to add on that?
So I think I did demo quite a few options, but again, just to reiterate, today on Azure App Services, we allow you to basically have this kind of a secure communication between your apps and different, say, clients or a data estate. And again, you could secure your traffic both inbound to Azure App Services and outbound from Azure App Services. And all of that happens using the whole VNet integration feature today. I'll give you another example. You could also use tools like Azure App Gateway. So you can even have an Azure App Gateway placed in front of your Azure App Services if you really want to run some of those firewalls and also have the whole gateway capabilities in terms of filtering the incoming traffic and whatnot for your web applications. You can even take this step further. And remember, we have this globally available service around Azure Front Door. So you can even have an Azure Front Door as your first. So basically the idea is you can basically again place an Azure Front Door in front of your Azure App Services web app. Now what happens is when the customer wants to interact with your web application, the traffic first lands on your this global load balancer. And again, you could even have this multi-geo deployment using Azure load balancer. So again, that lights up some very, very interesting scenarios. So if you have a web application where customers are scattered all over the globe, you could basically have your apps deployed in regions closer to your customers and then let your Azure Front Door do all of this smart global load balancing based on the region closest to your end user. So yeah, there are many different options available for you.
Cool, great. We just have a few minutes left. I want to show a few things on my screen. If we can just show that. I'm going to show the show page. For those of you who want to find links to everything we discussed today, go to ak.ms/the launch space app service migration. They call it a short link, but it's just hopefully just a memorable link. ak.ms, the launch space app service migration. That's where you can find them all. This is the show page here, and I'll add the links down here as the show goes on. A couple other things I wanted to highlight. We have some docs that will be there on the show page. They'll be shared, introducing the new Azure Migrate, a little bit of a blog and some information about the Azure migration tools. There's a migration center you can go to, a migration and modernization center, which highlights this tool and others. Also, App Service Migration Assistant that Christina showed today, and Azure Migrate. Overall, this is how you actually assess. This is for architects and ops people who want to assess multiple scenarios for migration of not just your apps, but your data as well. And there's a couple other items in there that I'll highlight too. Now, I also want to mention next week, Jason Hand is going to be hosting. I won't be the host next week. He's going to take over and he's going to host some of our guests talking about building WebSocket-based web apps with the Azure Web PubSub service, which is a cool publisher subscribe service that we've got available on Azure as well. But today, as we wrap up, I just want to say thank you very much to Gaurav and Christina. Thank you for all that info. And you'll find all of the links and everything you need on ak.ms/the launch space app service migration. And you'll be able to check out this recording as well on Microsoft Developer YouTube channel and also at ak.ms/the launch space, which is our main page for that. So thanks, Gaurav. Thanks, Christina. Great show.
Thank you, Brian, for inviting us to the show. And thank you, everyone, for joining in. Hope you find all the content and the demo super useful for you. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thanks.